That's Metallico over there across the river. They're a scrap metal dealer. Most of what they collect makes its way down the Ohio, into the Mississippi, and onto a ship bound for China. We don't make much steel here anymore. In fact, compared to the mid to late 20th century, we don't make much of anything here anymore. The greed contained in our continuous growth model, as they call it, has forced most of America's once huge steelmaking industrial might offshore. Where labor is cheaper, to countries with little regulation, places friendly to business, where employee retention doesn't come with exorbitant cost. This happened with an unholy alliance between two organized crime syndicates, big labor and those wonderful Democrats in our benevolent government. You see, the Democrats have this game they play where they act like they are the advocates of labor unions. At the same time, they are taking steps to hasten the demise of entire industries where these unions operate. It's a sick and economically devastating game for workers, exploiting a base human emotion we call greed. They did it with steel, and it's happening again. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, let me explain. If you were old enough to have lived through the 70s, it's a time in your life you'll never forget. It was a miserable decade. Ridiculously high interest rates, high energy costs, gas rationing, high unemployment, high crime, racial tension, misery, and plenty of despair to go around. The worst thing about that decade was the death of a massive wealth-generating machine, a machine that over the course of 100 years became an absolute behemoth, a seemingly never-ending cash machine that was responsible for providing the material to build the modern world. This was the legacy of steel. The steel industry, after more than 100 years, was in its death throes, and it was clear that the sun was all but setting on the steel industry in America. But why? People will forever argue over the reasons, but it's not rocket science. We know what those reasons are. There's no magic in this world, particularly where money is concerned. Investors want a return on their investment, and if they're not getting it, they move on. Owners, operators, boards, managers, they have an obligation to profit for the shareholders. Workers, under the drunk-with-power influence of unions, seem to either forget or just completely ignore this obligation. When, as an employee, you forget that company profits matter, when you ignore your responsibility to engage in productivity at a rate which is profitable for your employer, and instead decide to play a part in strangling a company's ability to make a profit, the company ends. Industry ends. Lives are destroyed and entire communities die a slow and miserable death. I once had a conversation with two old steel workers that were retired from U.S. Steel's Homestead Works. They spent about an hour bragging about 8 weeks paid vacation. 8 weeks. And $70,000 a year back in 1978. Do the math adjusted for inflation on that salary. They told me about sleeping on the job every day. They talked about all the items and time that they stole from the company. I said, wow, no wonder the mills went out of business. They both disagreed vehemently. No, they said. They were making tons of money. They could afford it. Well, I walked away more than just a bit befuddled. They were making tons of money, huh? Yeah, sure they were. Companies making tons of money always go belly up. Sure, you see it all the time. Wait, what? Only someone being thoroughly indoctrinated with counterintuitive nonsense would believe such a thing. The unions bankrupted the steel industry. Regulations perpetrated by the same political party the unions support bankrupted the steel industry. The writing was on the wall, but somehow the unions and their minions couldn't or wouldn't see it. They wanted more from a well that was running dry. They supported candidates in a political party that was sucking even more money from the well in the form of increasing regulations. They were engaged, however unwittingly, in a two-pronged attack against an industry. And we all know the results. Now let's fast forward to 2023. It's happening again. The United Auto Workers are on strike demanding a 40% raise and a 4-day work week. What could possibly go wrong? We've been here before. We know what happened, but somehow it's different this time? No, it's not. There's actually zero difference. The UAW is still supporting the same political party they always have. The party that played a role in instituting the regulations that, in conjunction with ridiculous union demands, all but eradicated the steel industry in the 70s and 80s. Well, they are at it again. The Democrats' Green New Deal policies are pushing impossible regulations on the auto industry. They're mandating impossible CAFE standards in their push towards the manufacture of electric cars that we don't have the power grid to support and most people don't want or cannot afford. These new electric cars will require much less labor to produce. Most of the major components can and will be made overseas for a fraction of the cost of U.S. production. We are literally in the exact same place we were in the 1970s. Union greed pushing companies to the brink, driving up costs to uncompetitive levels, and forcing companies to offshore production. Meanwhile, the party that supposedly supports the union is doing their level best to eliminate the American worker with regulations. It's really astonishing, the parallel here. Have we learned nothing? The thirst for money and power are unquenchable, it seems. The greed of the unions and the regulations brought by their political allies are the perfect storm that will once again destroy an entire industry. These politicians know just exactly what they're doing. The union leadership knows exactly what it's doing. These aren't stupid people. No, these are the destroyers. They destroy everything they touch, and they could care less about you, the worker. If you are in a union involved in manufacturing, you have become a tool of these destroyers. Their aim is the total deindustrialization of this country. It started with steel. Now it's autos. They've been using you to eliminate manufacturing from our shores. They instill a sense of entitlement and greed that emboldens you to make impossible and unsustainable demands. Meanwhile, they attack your industry with impossible regulations. Voila, jobs gone. And when they have succeeded in making America green, what will be left? Service-based unions that will make life impossibly expensive for everyone? No. That party you've been supporting for the last 100 years? Yeah. They'll simply outlaw your existence. Their mission will be accomplished. There will be no need for your union dues anymore.